Welcome. My name is Corinne Waldow. I'm the Senior Director for Economic Vitality at the Boulder Chamber. And I want to thank you for joining us for this industry-specific session that we put in place this week, specifically for our gyms, fitness studios, personal recreation facilities, following the recent mask orders. We want to make sure that we are all level set. We understand the requirements and rules for these specific facilities, and allow you to ask your questions, provide your feedback, and get the information you need to safely reopen. At this time, I'm going to hand it off to Jesse Rounds with Boulder County Public Health.
Thanks, Corinne. And I want to apologize straight off. I'm not going to run my video because I'm trying to conserve bandwidth here, so I don't have problems with sound as well. So, but definitely let me know if I need to speak up. Okay, so today we will just go over a short conditions update, basically looking at where we are as a community in terms of COVID-19. And then I'll jump into a little bit sort of an overview of the current public health order, the mask orders at the state, county, and municipal levels, just sort of sorting that out. And then we'll jump into recreation requirements and guidelines from the Safer at Home order before we finish off with Q&A. So to start, I just wanted to show the Colorado 3-day trend for COVID-19 case reporting or positive cases. And I think the important thing here is really the trend. We're seeing that upward swing since the beginning of June. And that is driving a lot of the concern from public health officials. And lest we forget that that's also happening here. I will note that this is a 5-day trend chart instead of a 3-day trend chart. I'm not sure why one jurisdiction does it one way and another does it a different way, but the trend is the important thing here, not necessarily the exact figures. And again, we're seeing that upward trend in cases. We're seeing it here, we're seeing it across the metro area. While we're down from the peak in June, that you know, it was reported as that surge, we are not back down to normal levels. And as I showed there, we're actually slowly increasing as a trend over time. So, I point that out to try and give some context for why we are where we are with Safer at Home and with the mask order. In terms of Safer at Home, we've been in Safer at Home in one form or another since May. As many of you in the recreation field remember, when it started out, gyms were not allowed to be open. And then gyms were open at very reduced levels. We've, you know, as communities have been able to open up, there have been changes over time. But I also want to point out that, you know, the thing that happened with bars a couple weeks ago, bars that don't provide food service were able to open. And then when we saw worrying trends, the governor closed them. And arcades and amusement parks haven't been open at all since the beginning of this. Not that that really, you know, I'm not saying there's equivalency, but I just want to point out that, you know, we're trying to open where we can, and it is a industry by industry, really thoughtful exercise in what opens and what can safely open. In terms of the face covering orders, the statewide face covering order went into effect on July 16th, and it's in effect for 30 days unless the governor extends it. The countywide face covering order is indefinite. And then if your business is located within any of the municipalities listed here, you have additional face covering orders that are specific to your municipality. And you need to be aware of those and adhere to those. And it's important to point out, I think, that the strictest order applies. In terms of the state and county orders, everyone over the age of 10 must wear a facial covering. Indoors, in public spaces, and I'll get into that a little bit if that would help, but also outdoors if social distancing cannot be maintained. That's actually the county's order that requires that. In terms of public spaces are defined in the in the mask order as pretty much everything except for a private home, hotel room, motel room, or dorm room. Any place where non-family members are gathering is a public space. So in terms of what the order actually says, no owner, operator, or manager of a public indoor space may provide service to or allow an individual to enter unless the individual is wearing a face covering. And it also really, explicitly defines that you must post signs about face coverings and the face covering order at the entrance to your business. And in terms of consequences, the state order allows the public health authority to seek the loss of a business license for failure to comply. So there are pretty big consequences for that. What this all means is that we need to work together to reduce spread. The same simple activities that we've been pushing from the very beginning are the best way to address this. We need to wash our hands, maintain physical distance, wear masks, and adhere to the public health orders. Those are the ways we're going to get to sort of a better place in terms of this. Other things to note, the activities we participate in really affect our exposure to risk. Being outside is one of the great ways to get away from being stuck indoors, and get, it's a low risk activity as long as you can socially distance and you're keeping your hands clean. But I really just, I want to really have this graphic really emblazoned in everyone's mind as a way to think about how to participate in public life outside of the home. Switching gears totally now, I want to jump back into the safer at home order. If you've been on these calls before, you will recognize these. These are the same highlights that Mary and Marnie have been pointing out for weeks now. But I really just, I think it's important that we hit these again. And then also the face covering note here is really important. The public health, or I'm sorry, the state's face covering order is clear that you must wear a face covering while indoors. You can remove your face covering to catch your breath. We recommend that you go outside, do that. But while you're inside exercising in a gym, you need to be wearing a face mask. The one caveat to that is if you have safety equipment that you're wearing that precludes you from wearing a mask. But that's something we would love to discuss with you. So please, if you think that's a situation, get in touch with us before you change your rules. Anyway, gyms, recreation centers, pools are open, 25% capacity or 50 people per room, and whichever is fewer. Sharing equipment is discouraged because we really need to keep that equipment clean, and that also applies to disinfecting between uses. Restrooms and showers are open, but do think about in those restroom, shower, locker rooms, closing off areas so that you can promote social distancing. In terms of outdoor recreation, any activity of 10 or fewer people is allowed. If you can social distance, you should. It's still a good idea to wear a face covering, but if you can extend that distance to the point where you can safely exercise while socially distanced, face coverings are not required. let me see what else here. Swimming pools are open up to 50% capacity, no more than 50 people. They need to be cleaned every hour in terms of high touch surfaces. And playgrounds and outdoor sports facilities open as well, no more than 25 people per court or field. And again, cleaning those high touch surfaces. More about outdoor recreation. For organized youth and adult recreation and sport leagues, groups of 25 players, excluding the coaches and referees, you really do need to be aware of who is using those facilities. In case there is an outbreak, we really do need to be able to trace those cases. And also consider holding fewer games or spread out games so that we can make sure that there isn't any spread of any COVID-19. Excuse me. And then also do not share snacks or water. Encourage people to bring their own equipment. Spectators are discouraged for adult sports and permitted for youth sports as long as people are social distancing. Excuse me. In terms of the mask order, I really want to go back to this. I know this has been something that in the recreation world has been, well, there's been a lot of mixed messages about it. We have clarified with the state multiple times, masks are required. The sign that I posted on here, actually, when you get the presentation, when Corinne sends it around, you can click on that link and actually get an 8.5 by 11 version of that sign to post at your business. We really want to encourage people to understand that if you can provide alternatives that safely allow people to exercise in accordance with all the public health orders without a mask, in other words, going outside, then you should do that. And I also really want to point out that under the state mask guidance and under the civil rights guidance that came out of the state as well, you can deny service to those who can't or won't wear masks. You should, as best you can, provide an alternative, but it is as best you can. You don't have to, you know, if you make reasonable accommodation, that's great. You do not have to go above and beyond. So couple common recreation Q&As. Are masks required indoors? Yes, they are required indoors for all activities. Unless there is a safety reason, in other words, a piece of equipment that makes it so that you cannot wear a mask. If there is social distancing, are masks required? If it's indoors, yes, you do have to wear a mask. If it's outdoors, you don't have to wear a mask under any of the orders as long as you are participating in a small group and you're outdoors and you're socially distanced. That's different. But indoors, regardless of the spacing, you need to be wearing a mask. And with that, just want to advertise our webinar sessions, 3 p.m. We just did the general session an hour ago, and the Spanish language sessions are released in collaboration with the Latino Chamber. If you want to sign up for future updates, please check that website. Corinne updates it every week, and maybe sometimes more than once a week, as we are looking, you know, in those special sessions on Wednesday, like now, we're really looking for what are the hot button issues, what are the concerns that we're hearing from the business community, from operators, managers, so that we can really address your concerns. And with that, happy to take questions. If you come up with a question after this, or if you have a question throughout the coming weeks, please contact us at our COVID Biz email. If you have a complaint, you can call the call center, and we will respond to those and get back to you about that. With that, happy to take questions.
Great, Jesse. We have others on the phone call joining Jesse to assist with questions if we have them. One of the questions was around the social distancing calculator and the link for that. So I'm going to put that in the chat right now. so that you can see the space occupancy abilities for especially those indoor and outdoor events. Another question, so we did get a comment, thanking all of you for continuing to do these and providing help with this knowledge, these ability to ask questions is invaluable to businesses. And I hear that on a regular basis. So thank you for dedicating this time. Now, someone said that they're getting pushback from people coming into their facility claiming a medical exemption. Do they need to provide documentation of that medical exemption in order to remove their mask?
I can answer that one for you, Jesse. No, they don't need documentation, but they also cannot come into your facility. So you have to either have provided some accommodation, which would, for a recreation or an indoor space, is really challenging unless you have a dedicated room that's where they can be alone or with only their household members. It doesn't allow for them to not wear a mask. So having the medical exemption, you don't need to get any proof of that, but it doesn't allow them into a gym now without a mask. So there's no caveat that allows that.
Okay. So I think, Jesse, you answered this question after it was already put out there, but I want to just reiterate it. If they take a fitness class outside and use some of those backyard spaces or park if they have a permit to do so, people can remove masks if they're socially distanced in the spaces that they're using for the program. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words right now.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking the question again, because I think it is really important that we get the message out. Yes, and the caveats I would add to that are: one, you still need to be aware of the numbers of people who are involved and the spaces that you're in. That social distancing calculator will be really helpful with that because it's going to limit your class size. And two, I also really want to, I don't know if it's reiterate, I just want to point out or emphasize that as you're social distancing, think about the activity you're doing. You may need to consider doing more than what the space calculator would say. As we do these more strenuous exercises, our breath goes further when we're breathing hard. So you need to think about how far you are from your fellow participants and instructor and all that. So just, yes, you can use outdoor spaces, but that's not an invitation to pack a class into a small outdoor space.
Great, and I've actually seen some. Oh, go ahead, Marnie.
Sorry, I wanted to add another piece to that, and that is that would be per the Boulder County's face covering order, but you should also be aware of your local orders. I think this particular question mentioned that they're in the city of Boulder, and the question is whether or not the city of Boulder is more restrictive. I do think that that it looks as though public accommodation includes any outdoor space if you're providing any service to the public. So I think that the city of Boulder is more restrictive and would not allow that to occur.
Thank you, Marnie.
Okay, so check your local mask orders to see if there's any distancing requirements and whether or not in an outdoor space that is required you still wear a mask. Can indoor lifeguards remove masks?
I can answer that one too.
Okay, great.
So yes, let me put it this way. They are actively, if they are actively in the role of a first responder, they are able to remove their mask based on the guidance that we see on the state's website. It has to be an imminent emergency, I believe, if they're in Boulder County, however. So if they're just sitting in the chair, watching over the folks in the pool, I think they need to be masked.
Okay, so there's a question that if they have a child in their space who has a symptom that comes up during class, do they need to have an isolation room per Boulder County? And what are PPE requirements for the staff?
This would be at a camp. Is that, I guess I'm.
Yeah, I think either at a camp or indoors in a class or.
Like at a fitness class, possibly.
Mhm.
I would think if and Marnie and Mary, if you're, I know this question has come up in the past, I believe.
It's definitely come up for camps, and camps are supposed to have some ability to isolate ill children. It hasn't come up in this context in gyms, but I think if somebody starts to display symptoms during a class, you would certainly want to remove them from that space.
I think your best guidance for that is going to be looking on the state site for youth sport and youth camps, which we can send that link out to you. But there's guidance about having those areas available.
Yeah, and specifically, we're looking at if this is a licensed childcare operation. So, and some of the day camps are licensed that way. So there is specific guidance out there for that. But if it's just a gym, there is not isolation room called out for recreation facilities to have that. Again, camps or licensed childcare are dealt with separately.
Yeah. So this is a dance class, for example, or a karate class. Okay.
I would say there's nothing in the, as Lane said, there's nothing in the guidance that requires them to have an isolation.
Well, could you answer the PPE, question as to if you start to see someone, is there more protective gear that a staff could wear in order to protect themselves?
I think if they're wearing masks, they, again, this is not outlined in the guidance, but I think in various sectors, they recommend wearing gloves if you can, and a face mask.
Okay.
The most protective for being around contagious people is a respirator. But if you're going to equip your staff with respirators, you have to have an entire respirator program, which is a medical evaluation that they're healthy to wear it. You need to fit test. So there's a lot of pieces if you're going to add additional protective equipment, making sure you're compliant with OSHA and all the other requirements that would come in with that. So, so that it isn't as easy to answer. There are other things that are more protective than a face mask, but they do come with additional components if you're going to actually start to use those in your practice.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions coming in. So I'm going to ask, so when people are working out and if they're having trouble breathing and they need to remove their masks temporarily to catch their breath, can a facility set up a safe zone for participants to go to remove their masks very short amount of time to catch their breath?
That is not defined in the order. I think, Mary, you and I talked about this a little bit. I think what we're recommending is allowing someone to go outside to be able to catch their breath is the best, safest thing to do in that case.
And I know that it sounds like that can be disruptive if a class is being taught. So if you have extra space where you can feel like there's good ventilation and you can provide that, that's great, but that is not a requirement.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes best intentions don't work out that way. So if you only have a single space and multiple people suddenly all want it at the same time as they're, getting stressed, now you're necessarily defeating the whole goal if multiple people are headed to that zone at the same time, taking their masks off. So you just have to be really careful about what you're trying to do. Again, I think exercise with masks indoors is going to always present challenges now with the new state order.
Can you talk a little bit more about the safety equipment definition and masks in sports? Example would be hockey helmet with players in mouth guards and then masks.
So I think the way that it's defined is if the equipment cannot be worn safely with a mask, then the mask does not need to be worn. And I think if you have questions about, specific equipment, I think it might be best to speak to the state or to an attorney to see if they can sort out exactly what safety equipment would be allowed. But if a participant says, I can't safely do this, wear this safety equipment and a mask, I think you can make that judgment call. But I'm happy to hear anybody.
The hockey helmet specifically was one of the situations that was raised that brought that forward. So we do know that was one of the situations that was evaluated and said that people do not need to wear a mask when they're wearing all of that equipment.
Well, and then, mouth guards, there are a couple actual sports that require mouth guards in order to participate. So, that would be another one that people might have a lot of questions about. All right, so let's say that somebody has an outdoor class and they're using the social distancing calculator and they're looking at that 12 feet by 12 feet space. If you create a flow of traffic and a pattern for your classes that require people to move in particular directions, could you not do the 12 feet around each person?
Anybody?
That one's probably challenging. I think that typically where we've seen allowances for not looking at the 12 by 12 grid for each person are sort of stationary activities like graduation ceremonies or things like that, where people are not active and moving around. So that might need to be a case by case situation if you're trying to present some other situation that you're trying to deal with. For exercise specifically, though, when people are breathing harder, that 6 feet is still not necessarily protective. So I think we would want to be really cautious about what you're trying to propose to include a lot more people into a space, especially indoors.
Okay. So to confirm, if a person comes to your facility or to any of these individuals' facility and states that they have a medical exemption for wearing a mask, they cannot let them in. Is that correct? They have to turn them away?
Unless you have some accommodation, which would be a completely isolated space where they're the only ones in there, like meaning you have separate hours, or again, I don't know how you do that in recreation. It's a lot easier to think of examples with other business sectors, but correct. They can't come in during normal hours and just be in with all the other patrons without a mask on.
And there's nothing they can sign that changes that specific rule?
No. And we don't issue cards. We've heard of that. There's fraudulent cards people are presenting saying Boulder County Public Health gave them an exemption to not wear a mask. There's no such thing. No entity is issuing any of those kind of cards.
I think this is a question as to whether you have it or if it's something we can get our hands on. But is there some sort of video or, information on proof that masks do not limit your oxygen or make it dangerous to exercise? I think that's the biggest complaint that gyms and fitness studios are finding, is that people are saying, I'm not getting enough oxygen, or I can't do this because I have too much CO2, or we've seen it and heard it. Is there anything that we could send to some of our fitness facilities that they could use as a way to counter those claims?
I don't think we have a specific video that we could send. However, we have been urging gyms to decrease the intensity of workouts. This is unfortunately a sacrifice we have to make so we can keep those masks on.
Yeah, I'm not aware of
But-
any specific information about that. Yeah.
And then this particular send, is there a media team that we could use to help create maybe a video for our community? I can put it on the list of requests that, local businesses have asked for, as far as, things that chambers and some of the other economic development authorities and some of the other business support organizations have. At this time, there isn't one, but I will definitely put it on a list of one of those identified needs that businesses have requested. So no promises, just putting it on that list right now. All right, so there's a question about room capacity. First off, this question is about the maximum number of people allowed in a specific room. This particular person has an indoor tennis courts, and they've been using the guideline of 10 people max in a room, but they've seen that it's 25% capacity to a room. What's the actual rule? And, if their indoor court is considered a room.
Well, a room is defined as having 4 walls to it and a door. So it kind of depends on the situation. But they are allowed to have up to 50 people indoors or 50% capacity, whichever is fewer. Maybe you could go back to that slide, Jesse.
Yeah. Let me see here.
Should just be.
Here we go. Is that right? Indoor
Oh, I'm
facility.
sorry. I said 25% capacity or 50 people, whichever is fewer.
So the rule is 25% capacity or 50 people, whichever's fewer per room. And a room's defined as 4 walls and a door. So if you have an indoor tennis court and it's surrounded by 4 walls and a door, but this also requires that people maintain social distancing as well, correct?
Correct. So if it's just one court, you're obviously not going to have 50 people playing tennis on one court. So, that's where these become judgment calls on a, case by case basis.
Okay. So let's say that you hear a rumor that something's changed, or someone tells you, that now masks aren't required, or any of those things. What are the steps you should take to verify before announcing that to your patrons, or to implementing something different?
Check with us. Contact your local public health authority. We are in contact with the state and with our fellow public health agencies around the state. And we're all trying to work to make sure that our messaging is the same. Every once in a while, like you said, a rumor gets out, or somehow someone misinterprets something, and that changes a bunch of. It's probably best to just check, and that's why we provide that email address. And we're all available to try and address these sorts of questions throughout the week.
And again, if you can't remember it and you just have my email on hand and you want to type a question, I'm pretty good at forwarding those on and getting answers as quickly as I can. But in a lot of cases, it's a question that's been asked by multiple, and they have the answer ready to go if it's available. If not, they're pretty good about checking in on it. But one thing we have noticed is probably the best first step is not to announce it to your customers or your patrons until you verify those are the rules, because turning backwards is sometimes it sometimes causes confusion with those people coming into your facilities. Is there guidance on spray and splash parks at this time?
So the spray and splash pads, the public health order doesn't really address it specifically. We think that it would be under the restrictions of outdoor pools, so you could follow that guidance. I think the thing that's come up having this question asked in the past, is the need to clean those hourly, and whether or not that's something that you have the capability to do. Splash pads attract younger populations, parents and young children, so it's important those high touch surfaces are following that guidance of cleaning every hour. And I guess I'll just take that opportunity to say the ability to achieve some of these things that you're allowed to do doesn't, that's one of the things to factor in, because the public health order talks about what the restrictions are. You can be more restrictive if you feel that you are unable to accommodate particular pieces of it.
Okay, so speaking of which, we got a comment that somebody here on the call has worked with Jesse and Mary and are very thankful that you're helping businesses go through this learning curve. It's a challenging time in trying to figure out these caveats and these pieces. Lane, could you give that definitive answer on the hockey equipment? Someone on the call said that they've been told by the county that their skaters must wear masks. Now, they didn't say hockey skaters, so let's define either if it's skaters or hockey, if there's a difference there.
There is. The exemption is specifically when there's safety equipment that's needed to be worn that would now make wearing a mask difficult or dangerous and compromise someone's health. So specifically the hockey helmet with mouth guard and then a mask on top of that is deemed too many layers, too much danger for ability to breathe. So versus people that are just out ice skating, that would not be the same situation.
Okay. What is the protocol of the county if a business has been reported as being in violation?
I mean, I think our first step is to talk to you. We reach out to businesses, we try to educate. We are seeking your cooperation and your compliance. If we get into a situation where there are multiple violations and we are, unable to work with the business to achieve compliance, we will send a notice of violation, and that notice of violation will, depending on what type of violation, whether it's a mask order violation or a public health order violation, will outline the consequences of non-compliance, and also outline the next steps in terms of, how many days you have to respond and what we would do next to refer this to our attorneys. And then at that point, the county attorney takes it over if we continue to not have compliance, and they can seek whatever remedies are allowed under either the public health order or the mask order. And that's, but that is the last resort for us. We really would prefer to start and end with education.
Okay. Education, so ask your questions, get the answers, and especially before you make any big changes. There is a question about outdoor tennis courts. What's the maximum amount of players that can be outside on 2 tennis courts? Is it 25 like youth adult sports? Is it 50 like fitness classes outside, or is it the groups of 10?
The state guidance actually addresses this in their guidance for personal recreation. So for tennis courts, it may be open up to 25 people at a time per court or field. That would be guidance.
25. This is similar to basketball courts and some of those others. Okay.
Right.
All right, let's see.
Now just add the caveat that it still requires social distancing. So if for some reason the court that you have is much smaller, like a small half court basketball, and you can't accommodate 25 people with social distancing, then you're going to have to limit it to fewer.
I'm also thinking about those tennis courts that are designed for youth, or the youth guideline. You know, that'd be a lot of people on a tennis court in that space. So, is there any update from the state on whether they're going to extend their current mask order, and how does this coincide with the Boulder County's order that now follows the state's a little closer, that's indefinite?
I'll just say that we are certainly hopeful that the state order is modified in the future. We have no idea whether it'll be extended or not. You know, there were a lot of challenges that happened when the state order came in, and it obviously was not consistent with our municipal, our county, and really many of the metro orders that were already in place. So there is a desire and an effort to try to get the state order to address and be more consistent with what the orders were before that state order. But we haven't heard anything from the state on their intention. I would say, going back to the trends that Jesse had presented, I would expect there to be a need for masks for still quite some time. So it would not surprise me at all that there will still be some state order moving forward, but we haven't heard anything.
So if the state were to change their order to be a little bit more consistent to what you were doing in the past, would the county then change its order back to those types of protocols and restrictions?
Yeah, I think the way it's set up now, we wouldn't even have to make a change, because I think it just references the state order for indoor requirements. And so it's kind of intended to mirror that. But yes, we would like to see allowances for when you can adequately social distance in certain settings. But again, other settings where you're breathing really hard, there still is concern. So it isn't safe to be 6 feet away from people without masks, breathing really hard, singing. You know, there's a lot of activities that droplets are going to move around. So really we're going to be looking at what makes the most sense. And ideally, again, outdoor exercise. If you have difficulty wearing a mask exercising, not everyone does. But if you're being really strenuous, you shouldn't be compromising your health that way. So you really need to look at other alternatives.
And I think there's a little confusion. So what did the state order do on top of the former Boulder County mask order prior to you guys making the change?
I don't know if that means what are all the things that changed.
Yeah, so the question is, what changed in the Boulder County order since the state mask mandate came into place? So what adjustments did you have to make in order to match the state?
Yeah, basically now indoors, the state order is what the Boulder County order says. So it changed the age at which masks are required. There are no allowances for social distancing. So those are the main, I think, changes. And, you know, the state order definitely put the onus back on the business, where if the business is not compliant, they can lose their license. So those are the big changes that the state order brought about.
And to remove some of the confusion, the county felt it was best to at least align with the state order while the state order is in effect. Is that correct?
Say that the Metro directors recognized, the Metro Public Health directors recognized the need for consistency. That was one of the reasons the governor said they were putting the mask order in place. And that was not achieved. When the state's order was put in place, it became inconsistent with every single order that was out there. So that unfortunately required all the different people that had orders to start trying to change them to now be consistent.
And I think this will be the final question. So Boulder County is following the state orders when it comes to personal recreation, outdoor recreation, you know, gyms, fitness studios, as well as the other industries, correct? You're not doing anything differently at this time.
Outside of our mask order, that's the only thing that's different for outdoors. Otherwise, all the sectors for safer at home, Boulder County doesn't have anything more stringent than what is allowed for under the 8th edition of Safe.
Okay. Again, this is one of those crystal ball questions, but do you foresee maybe yoga studios where students and mats are spaced a predetermined distance apart be included in future order modifications?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that question or anything the state was planning. So, but we have no idea what they may be doing. We certainly we'll still like to see that coordination happening so that we are consistent and we can really look at addressing risks appropriately and not being too conservative. But I don't have any idea if that would be allowed in the future.
I've seen some things, coming out, people, sending questions to people outside the county as well about yoga studios. And one of the feedback was it's still a group class where people are exercising, and breathing heavily, in some cases, very heavily. And it's, I don't know what the answer was, but they did talk about how it's still seen as a group fitness class where people are breathing heavily. All right, I don't see any other questions. Again, don't be afraid to ask. Some people on this call said how great it is to work with the Mary, Marnie, Lane, Jesse. Please continue to ask those questions, get that clarification, especially before you make announcements to your customers about changes, unless those changes have actually been implemented. At this time, I'll say I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their week. We've gotten through Wednesday. Make it through the rest of your week and safely and healthy. And we'll see you next week for the regular 3 o'clock call which is a cross-industry focus. Thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. Thanks, everybody.
Well.